Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Darrel Ray, author of The God Virus, and tonight's book in question, Sex and God, How Religion Distorts Sexuality, to talk about sociosexuality. So, Darrel Ray.
I see so many faces of people I know, but also some people I don't know. We got to welcome Lynn back here special, because she just came from Washington, D.C. just to see this talk. Can you believe that? Well, I exaggerate a little bit. But she just moved to Kansas City from Washington. This is your first meeting of our pre-thinker group?
I think it's my second.
Okay, second meeting. Well, good for you. Thanks for coming, Lynn. And to the rest of you that I think I've met about everybody here, at least if not now, before. Well, I thought it's always good to start with a word of prayer. So, would you listen up here? Some of you have heard this prayer before.
Oh, okay.
Some of you, okay? Dear Flying Spaghetti Monster, we thank you for giving us sex and sexuality, whether homo or heterosexual, bi or trans, and for not making us like those uptight Christians, Muslims, Mormons, and Baptists. We thank you for wonderful masturbatory fantasies and for the pornography upon which they're often based. FSM, we ask that you grant us sex partners, lovers, wives, and husbands that know where our G-spot, clitoris, and the sweet spot on our penis is. Grant us long, loving foreplay and deep, wet kisses, followed by huge orgasms and loving cuddles after. Grant us the courage and wisdom to communicate openly and honestly with our partners and give them more pleasure than we receive, for we know it is far better to give than to receive. Your noodliness, we do not need 72 virgins. In fact, we ask that you send no virgins, for we don't want to have to train them. Unless, of course, they're very willing to be trained. We especially plead today that you not send any repressed Christian virgins, male or female, for they will only feel guilty and cause great problems with their abstinence-only training. Your posthumous. We ask that you give us the wisdom to understand and appreciate our partner's kinks, or lack thereof, whether foot worship or spanking, ropes or talking dirty. Help us appreciate their full sexuality, and lead us not into temptation of judgment and scorn for others when their sexual preferences are not ours. We do ask in the name of Raman for retribution, shame, and scorn on pedophile priests, hypocritical ministers sleeping with the choir director, and gay-bashing closeted ministers. Oh, Spaghetti-O. We ask that you send condoms and birth control in abundance, and your blessings to the many dedicated workers at the Trojan Condom Factory and Planned Parenthood. In the name of Dan Savage and Greta Christina, we pray, for they are the true gods and goddesses of this world. You'll hear a Raman.
Raman.
Right. Good. Well, thanks for your patience. You will never hear a prayer like that in a Baptist church or a Catholic Mass. I will guarantee you that. But wouldn't it be fun to be able to do? see what the response would be. Okay, well, we're going to just jump into the content. I do hope that you, if you have some extra cash, to buy a raffle ticket. Everything, all the proceeds from the raffle ticket go to Recovering from Religion, to help us get Jerry and Sarah to Washington, D.C. and to start new groups around the country. How many of you met Jerry or have met Sarah? Okay, a lot of you. Okay, about half of you. If you don't know about Recovering from Religion, it's, find out about it later. I'll tell you all about it. But that's where the proceeds are going. We're trying to raise money to get even more groups and to support our web presence. So, just thought we would appreciate some artwork here. You're into the humanities, so did you know this? This was the original. It got edited later. You might have not realized that. So I just thought that was too
Somebody
good.
lost someone away, I guarantee you.
So I'm going to talk about one. Really, I'm only going to focus on about one chapter in the book. I could probably do a talk on every chapter in Sex and God. There's just so much information. When I started writing this darn book, I already thought I knew plenty. But I didn't have a clue how much there was out there to research and write about. I could have talked about the bonobo apes. This is at the zoo, and the sign says here that bonobo societies, females are in charge and sex rather than violence is used to keep order. And she says, thank God we've evolved.
Yep.
But I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about whether you masturbate or not. I do, but I don't know if anybody else in here does. We'll come back.
to 30 years, that's a bad.
30, okay. Well, you and I both wear glasses, I noticed. I could have talked about other cultures because I think the cultural comparison is really interesting. And I do spend several chapters in the book helping us draw a baseline, because what we think in our culture is, quote, normal or abnormal is largely determined by the religious crap that we grew up with and was developed around us and far before we were born oftentimes. But I'm not going to talk about that. That's another talk. What I am going to talk about is sexual programming and genetics and how that all comes together in religion. And much of what we're going to hear tonight is very recent research. Some of this stuff hasn't even been out 5 years, or even less in some cases. So to begin with, don't leave yet. This is we're not going to do statistics, but you do have to understand some basic statistics in order to understand where we're going to go with this. You're all familiar with the bell curve. So this is the bell curve, and it's a distribution of characteristics. Now, the distribution of characteristics could be distribution of height. So you could have, there's short people, medium people, and tall people. And you can see the short people would be in this part of the bell curve, people that are average height and people high height. So that's the way the distribution would happen. Or it could be the speed at which you walk, just normal walking. You could get a distribution. Or it could be a personality characteristic, how extroverted or how introverted you are. And again, you can get a bell curve from any of those characteristics. Characteristics could be personality, or they can be physical. So we're going to use some physical characteristics first of all to try and understand this little piece of statistics that will help us understand something about religion later. This is the world's tallest man, Robert Wadlow. He was 8 feet 11 inches high and still growing when he died in 1938. Tallest man ever. He had a pituitary or some kind of a, Hitton to know more about this than I do, some hormonal problem that just didn't stop him from growing. And those are normal-sized women standing next to the poor guy. I mean, it was really a disease, if you will. And then this is the current tallest man in the world and the current shortest man in the world. Both, I believe, are from China. He's from Mongolia or that area, and he's from northern China, I believe. And we can see dramatic differences. If we look at the bell curve, we can tell, well, this fellow, the tall fellow, would have been way up here, not in the 0.1%, but way, 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 way out. There's nobody taller than him. He's the tallest. So on the bell curve, he's out here at the tip. You can't go any farther. And the other guy was the shortest, so he's out at the tip. You can't go any farther than that. So helps us understand distribution among a population. But now let's look at height among male and female. We know the distribution is different for males and females. So here's the distribution for females, and it's skewed slightly to the shorter side, and to males slightly to the higher side. This is the population average. If you put all men and all women together, then that red line is where the midpoint is going to fall. So again, we can see there's a difference between males and females, and we'll come back to explore what that means a little bit later. So the distribution, the population average, is where the red thing is, and we can see that there's men are slightly taller, women are slightly shorter. And this is not, this is just a made-up bell curve here. It's not taken from any specific data, so don't get hung up, oh, is that exactly 5.3 or whatever, because it's not, just some bell curves I threw up there. I don't have graphs for those. And it's irrelevant. It's common sense. We know women tend to be shorter than men. We also know there's some women that are taller than men. We know some men that are shorter than women. So we can see but we know that there's an overlap right there. All this area right here is where the two populations overlap completely. There are very, very few men that are as short as some of the shortest women. And there are very, very few women that are as tall as the tallest men. That just tapers down very rapidly. So, height is partially inherited from, obviously, it's a genetic thing, but it's not perfect. Here's the way it works. If you were born of two very tall parents, you're probably going to be tall, but you're probably not going to be quite as tall as your parents were. If you were born of very short parents, you're probably going to be short, but you will be slightly, the tendency will be to be slightly taller than your parents were. In statistics, it's called regression to the mean. So, two short people have a kid, the kid's probably going to be taller than them. Not a lot taller, maybe 2-3 inches taller, but definitely taller. And that's a tendency. They might have a kid that's shorter than them, it's possible, but it's less likely. So if you just looked at the likelihood, probably going to have a 9 out of 10 chance the kid's going to be taller, and 1 out of 10 chance the kid's going to be shorter from short parents, and vice versa with tall parents. Got everybody? Right. Now there's other components to height, of course, and that's environment and nutrition that have some accounting for it. And genetics is not the only thing that's going on. We'll come back and explore a little bit of that later. Now there's some twin studies that show that height is about 81% predictable. If let's say you're a twin, and I don't know where your other twin is. If I know what your height is, I can predict your twin's height. 81%. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. And it's pretty good. If you can predict anything that much in statistics, you're doing pretty darn good. So that tells us that height has got a major genetic component to it. But identical twins are identical, aren't they? They have the same genes. So you'd think they would be identical in height as well. But they're not. Some twins are slightly taller. How many of you know twins that are slightly different in height? Yeah, so I mean it's pretty common. So we can see that not just because you're identical in genetics does not mean you're going to be identical in everything. In fact, there's quite a bit of research that just come out. I just read Jumping Genes. Did you read about the jumping genes? Yeah. Wow, that's going to throw a monkey wrench into some of the studies. But these jumping genes that really have an impact after we're conceived. And these are genes that are doing things your twin might do something in you, but doesn't work in your twin or jumps in a different way. I don't understand it. Ask Hitton to come back and explain it to us another time. But that's not something I'm going to be doing. Now, the same thing is true of personality characteristics. If I know your if you're a twin and I test you in your personality, I can predict the personality of your twin about 50%. Now that's still very good in terms of psychological and personality research. What's going wrong there, isn't it?
No, it's just having to cool itself. It's a really hot bowl.
Oh, okay. Okay. Now, you might think, wow, 50%, that sounds like a flip of a coin. It's not a flip of a coin. It's the amount of variance that's explained. 0 would be the flip of a coin. If I explain no amount of variance, if I can't make any prediction, then that would be a 0. So 50% is pretty good. Now let me illustrate this to you. How many of you are dog lovers? Okay, we've got a lot of dog lovers. I like cats too, so don't get me wrong, I love cats. But if I show you this picture up here, describe the personality of that dog. Anybody?
There's a lab, so it's going to be a little flighty, kind
Okay.
Energetic.
of
Energetic. Friendly. What else?
Maybe a little on the dumb side.
Okay.
He's not here to defend himself. Let's leave it.
Yeah.
Like to swim and like to dig.
Likes to swim. Okay, good. And likes to what?
Dig.
Dig. Okay. Give me the personality of that dog. Likes to what? Hunt. Okay.
Protector.
Smart.
Protector.
Protector. Other things?
Maybe more aggressive.
Maybe more aggressive than this one for sure. How about this one? Yep, I won't disagree with that. Now, some of you know this dog personally. How many of you remember this dog? This is my dog, Sugar. And she insists that if I put any other dogs in my pictures, I have to have her there too. So, and if you know Sugar, she is absolutely the sweetest dog you'll ever meet, but she's afraid of strangers until she gets to know you, and then you're friends for life. Isn't that interesting? I could just show you dog pictures, and you don't know those dogs, and yet you could tell me what their personalities were. That proves something. That proves almost without a shadow of a doubt that personality is inherited. I mean, this dog inherited its personality from its parents. Why would humans be any different? You are inheriting your personality through your parents. And that has big ramifications when you start thinking about it. How much of my genes is controlling my personality? How much did my genetics make me who I am today? And that kind of upsets some of the myths that we have in our culture about how people develop, how they interact with their world. So there's a lot of distributed characteristics. Intelligence, we're all pretty familiar with IQ scores. Well, IQ is just a bell curve, just like we saw earlier. Extroversion, introversion. How many of you would say you're introverted in here? Okay, we've got about half the people say they're introverted. How many would say you're extroverted? Okay. Now, if you're really born introverted, or really born extroverted, you're probably never going to go to the other side. But how many of you are kind of in the middle? You're neither one. Okay, we call you perverts.
I agree with that.
We're in the first time.
Actually, no, there is a technical word for you, and I'm one of you. I'm the kind in the middle. I can be extroverted today and introverted tomorrow. I can stay at home for a week at a time and do nothing but write, not talk to a human being, and then I can go travel and talk to hundreds of human beings like I'm doing now. I can go back and forth. The name of that is called ambivert. You're an ambivert because ambidextrous. But you get a lot more laughs if you call them perverts. All right. And dominance, non-dominance. Who would say you're probably a pretty dominant personality? Okay, good. How many say you're non-dominant? You avoid conflict and stuff. Okay. So, we can see right here in this room the distribution. And it's almost a perfect distribution. Everything I've asked, you've seen about an even number of hands going up in everything except the ambivert part. I think we had a smaller group than normal with that. Detail focused and big picture focused. Detail, how many are detail oriented? Okay, good. And the big picture kind of people? Right, right. When I wrote both of my books, I have two editors. I have a big picture editor and a detail editor. It's really fun to have both these brains working on my book because I'm nothing but big picture. I don't do too well with details. So I hired the big picture editor, and Deborah Schaus, and she just does a great job of forcing me to sharpen my thinking and reword things and get it all down. And then I get the little picture, the detail-oriented Kirsten, and Kirsten just rips it to shreds and finds stuff that Deb and I never saw, which is great. You wouldn't want to go to press unless you'd had both of these. That's important. Well, among these bell curves that we've seen all here, we also see sexuality and religiosity are on the bell curve. And most people don't think about that. How would sexuality and religiosity be on that same bell curve? How much of that has got something to do with your genetics? Interesting question, I think. So we're going to go back to 1997, and Judith Harris was, I believe, an assistant professor at Harvard. And she was up for tenure when she did what's called a meta-study. And a meta-study, for those of you who don't know, is a study of studies. She looked at all the studies on personality and development. And she came up with a conclusion that no one had ever done before. Her conclusion was what we're going to call, I'll explain this later, the 50-0-50 principle. When she published this, the Harvard faculty pretty much laughed her out of the department. They did not give her tenure. She had to go somewhere else and get another job. Now, this is a world-class thinker, and what she found was very important, but it was revolutionary. It was upsetting and totally changing the way psychology looks at itself. Have you heard of the concept of nurture and nature and nature-nurture? Well, basically what she was saying is we need to throw out the window. There's no evidence for it. There's a lot of evidence for some other ways of thinking, but nature, nurture, nature, whichever you put it, is not a valid way to understand human development, especially personality development. So this is a revolutionary study. And what happened over the next 5 years is other psychologists said, well, okay, let's see if she's right. And they started doing their own research and their own testing and stuff, and found out, lo and behold, within 5 years, it literally only took about 5 years, the entire psychological community had gone over to her way of thinking. And she's off somewhere, I believe at Stanford, laughing her head off at Harvard for not having given her tenure. But that's the way science works sometimes. What she found was 50% of personality is genetic. And we've already seen this in the dogs. It's very easy to predict what a lab is going to behave like. So we know there's a lot of genetics going on in that. Dogs, humans, and chimps. Oh gosh, the chimp anthropologist gal in Jane Goodall. I've even met Jane Goodall, and she's my wife. And Jane Goodall found rather early in the 1960s and 70s how unique chimpanzees' personalities are. They're very unique, but they're also related to primarily who the mother was, because they don't always, back then they didn't always know who the father was. Chimps like to have a lot of sex, of course. So what she found was that 50% of personality is genetic. And remember I talked about the twin studies earlier? And I said if I know your psychological profile, personality, I could predict your twins 50%. Well, that still leaves 50% that's subject to something else. And in the old days, we just said, well, the nature part of it is the genetics that we've got, and the nurture part of it is the part we can't account for. But that's not the way it works. Next thing she found is that 50% of your personality is based on non-shared environment. Now, I was raised in a family of 4 boys. And we're all about 2 years apart. So we had lots of fights and close encounters with death a number of times. I was left in charge of babysitting them. And
Two brothers and a sister.
Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. But as the oldest, you get stuck with the babysitting duties. Well, even though my brother and I had to share a bedroom, and we slept within feet of each other on bunk beds, he was way out, major extrovert, always had friends, always going to other people's houses, always playing sports and stuff. And I'm always in the bedroom reading a book. My mom's always yelling, get outside and play. She's always trying to get me out. And I'm doing experiments, and my mom's trying to support my scientific endeavors, and she tries to force my brother Brad to help me with science experiments, which he's not in favor of at all, unless we're blowing something up. Then he's right there helping me and screwing my experiments up too sometimes. I'm the oldest, he's the second oldest. So even though we're under the same roof, we're in very different environments. He's in a different grade. He may even be in a different school, depending upon elementary, middle school, and so forth. He's got a whole different peer group. I mean, if you look at our 2 lives, very little of our actual environment overlaps, except when we're asleep. Now, my mom had a rule that everybody had to take piano for 2 years before you could play any other instrument, which really irritated us. So we took 2 years of piano as fast as we could, and as soon as our 2 years sentence was up, because it felt like a jail sentence, we were out of there. And we'd take something else up. I took the violin up, my brother took the trumpet up, or whatever. So we can see that there's quite a bit of difference. Brad took up the trumpet, I took up the violin. He pretty much dropped the trumpet after a year, and I kept doing a little bit of music for years. None of my other brothers did any music. So, again, it's different, very different response to the shared environment. The non-shared environment. That's the part that we're not sharing. He and I don't share much in terms of the environment. We're in different ages, we're different schools, we're different hobbies, different interests. So that leaves the last part, the shared environment. What Judith Harris found was 0% of your personality is governed by the shared environment. Now, the shared environment is the roof over your head with your siblings. Period. My mom wanted us all to take piano. She forced us all to take piano. That's the shared environment. And what was the result of that? not one of us play the piano today. Not one of us do anything musical today. And my mom even had the four of us singing a quartet in church for about, I mean, the four boys, that's a built-in quartet, right? My mom had great hopes that we would be the next, what back then?
Osmond Brothers.
What?
Osmond Brothers.
No. This is a gospel singing group.
Oh,
Gospel singing group. I can't remember. Alvin. I remember Alvin was this really deep voice, and she wanted us. We wanted a bass among us. That was a really good shit. No, anyways, we were literally singing in quartets for like 2 years, and we hated every minute. Well, they hated it. I kind of liked it, but the other kids, they hated it. But so the shared environment is what our parents create for us. It's what they're trying to force us to do. And it didn't take with any of us. Not one of us did it take. So that's a great example. Religion was the same way. I grew up in a very religious family. My grandfather was a country church preacher for 45 years. My other grandfather was an elder, virtually his whole adult life. My parents became missionaries when they retired to Mexico, and they did some rather major work down in Mexico. So they were very dedicated, very religious, and shuffling Bibles and all that sort of stuff back and forth to Mexico. A lot of religious stuff going on with them, and yet the four boys in our family, none of us are religious now. Not one of us will darken the door of a church. You'd have to pay us to go in. Now, I did go on. I thought I was going to be a minister. I was the only one that got suckered in. You know, oldest child, you want to be the goody two-shoes. So I went all the way up and got my master's in religion until I finally figured out it was all bullshit. My other three brothers figured it out much earlier than me. So I'm the dumber of the four, I guess. I don't know. I'm the only college graduate, but so it took me longer. And they're quick to point that out. Darrel, you thought that? So we can see that shared environment doesn't contribute much of anything to personality development. Twin studies show that personality develops largely independent of the parents' own preferences. Now this really, if you got kids, you're sitting there thinking, oh, Darrel, I hope you're not right. But I am right, and I'm pretty darn sure. Your influence over your children is minimal. The research shows that you probably don't have more than a 3% influence over the children's personalities. And when they get to be adults, it goes to 0. Now, most of you could look back in your own childhood and say, what did mom and dad try to make me do? And are you still doing it? Chances are you're not. Now, with a couple exceptions, let's say that your parents were very athletic and they both have been good baseball players or something like that. Well, chances are you're going to inherit their athletic genes. So maybe you really enjoy playing baseball, but it's not because they forced you to play baseball or wanted you to play baseball. Speak of the devil. We thought we were going to keep the devil out here today.
Me and Josh in the same building.
So what was I saying before? I was so rudely interrupted by Cole.
Baseball.
Baseball, right, baseball. So baseball, I could say, wow, look at my son, he's the best baseball player. Look at my daughter, she's the best softball pitcher. I helped her do that. But it wasn't me, it was the genes. Yes, I was there to support him or her. I was there to teach him. But I got another kid over here, and this other kid is a piano player. I haven't got any use for pianos. Why would that kid ever want to waste their time on a piano? And this kid wants to go to college and study piano. No, I'm not paying for that. I don't want to do that. And so I don't take credit for that kid. And the kid grows up to be a concert pianist playing in Carnegie Hall, and now I have to eat my words because I took credit for the baseball player, but I don't want to take credit for the kid that became a piano player. Yeah.
Before I forget, because I was trying to think of where it fit into all this, but it kind of seems the inverse of what you're describing, but something like alcoholism or something like that that indirectly drives behavior. You know what I mean? Where you might be a drunk like your dad was, but it's the alcohol that causes it, and that's what's passed down by the genes. You see what I'm saying? It's kind of like an indirect cause of personality, and it seems...
Yeah, the personality's there. What if you lived in a culture where there was no alcohol? You'd still have personality characteristics that might go that direction. So we can see what's going on here is, in our baseball example, same thing we could say with math. I'm not that great at math. My first wife wasn't that great at math, but we've got a daughter that's extremely good at math. Well, the genes skipped us. I have the generation above me. My dad was very good at math, so she probably got the math from her, from my dad or grandfather. Not get it from me. I'm just not that good at it. Religion's the same way. What if you're very religious, and you raise your children religious, and you make them go to church, like my parents made me go to church at least 3 times a week. I sang in choir, I became a Sunday school teacher, I became a youth minister, I got a master's degree, all that pressure was on me, and of course all my brothers were doing the same thing until they graduated from high school and my parents couldn't make them anymore. Wow, well, my parents were very religious. But something happened to that. It didn't take with us. But it took with the rest of our family. My family is so religious. Everywhere you look in my family, you see missionaries, you see ministers, you see elders. Everybody except me and my 3 brothers. It's like something happened to our genes. They got, screwed up somehow. I should be preaching here today rather than talking like this. But there's a religious component, and we'll come back and look at how that works. Religiosity, it appears, is 50% inherited. Just like we saw other personality characteristics are 50% inherited. If the parents are religious, then if both parents are religious, they probably have the tendency towards religiosity. Now I want to be real clear here. I'm not saying there is a gene for religion. I'm not saying you got a gene and I didn't or anything like that. See, there's probably a cluster of characteristics that make you go one way or the other. Just like there's a cluster that make you extrovert or introvert. Blue eyes, if you got blue eyes or brown eyes, that's not one gene. That's a group of genes causing that coloration in your eyes. So it's not likely we'll ever find a religion gene, or is that stupid book, the God gene, what was it? No. Yeah, that wasn't a stupid book. That God gene book, not the God version.
The God gene, he did his original research on smoking.
Oh.
And then he linked it from smoking to religious experience.
Oh, okay.
And so it was really bogus.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So, what happened? Yeah.
Well, okay, do you define religiosity as the likelihood that you're going to be a devout member of organized religion? I mean, is it like what your belief system is?
No, it's your propensity to catch whatever religion's in your immediate environment. And it's a bell curve, just like we've seen in other things. So if you were born and raised in Hindu culture, that's the religion that's around you, you're probably going to catch, and I mean it in a disease concept, you're going to catch that religion. If you're raised in a Pentecostal environment, you're going to catch that. Now, if you've got a high propensity towards becoming religious, yeah, you're going to go on the deep end over here. You're become extremely devout, extremely religious, whatever. If you're not born with that propensity, you're going to probably go the other way. The trouble is, parents, if I had gone on to become a great minister and preaching in a mega church and all that sort of stuff, my mom and dad would have been in the front row of that church bragging about me and how they had raised me in the ways of the Lord. They aren't bragging, well, they're both dead now, but they weren't bragging by the end because I was an atheist and I was an out atheist to them, and so they were ashamed of that. They felt like they had failed me. Well, I don't see it as a failure. They taught me how to think. And they were pretty liberal in many ways, even though we went to a fundamentalist church. Very liberal. They really did try to make me think critically about things. So they would have liked to take credit, but really it has nothing to do with them. It had more to do with the genetics and the non-shared environment we talked about earlier. So what do parents really do? Parents provide an environment where children have boundaries. You do have to tell kids, get your homework done before you can play on the computer. You got to be in when street lights come on, and you can't play with those friends, unless you've got your homework done or whatever. So there's boundaries, those are very important, and there's support for what the kid wants to do. Children have their own minds, and they're going to go the direction they want to go. And if you don't have kids, you probably haven't experienced this. I had 2 kids. My son is way over here, and my daughter's way over here. You could not find 2 kids that are more different than these 2. And they were that way the minute they came out of the delivery room. It was almost that early. You could tell the difference in these personalities. My daughter, who's the oldest, would sit in the middle of the floor of her bedroom and play with the same toys or dolls for hours and not move more than 3 feet. My son, he couldn't stay within 3 blocks. He was always disappearing. It's scary as hell because, you know, a 3-year-old kid, where'd he go? You don't dare turn your head or he's gone. And he was very good at, he was always wanting to be out. And he's out in Colorado now as a ski bum. I joke that he's a 31-year-old going on 16. And it's not too far from the truth, and he knows it. Not saying anything he doesn't know. My daughter, on the other hand, got her doctorate in pharmacology and is a pharmacist in a hospital, you know, real responsible and, you know, very organized and all that sort of stuff. Very different from my son. 2 really different people. So that's what parents do. They provide an enriched environment for the kids. And again, we can see that there's a, again, this is just a, I'm just throwing it together 2 bell curves. I want to talk about the difference by religiosity, and we'll see that there's actually a difference by gender. Have you noticed that in our research, back there on the back table is copied. Thanks, John. That's the sex research we did last year. That's right. And what we found was 70% of our respondents were male. They're all atheists, and 30% are female. And that's what we see a lot throughout the United States, is there's more males in the secular community than there are females. It's a pretty big ratio, almost 2-1. We found in our research, we see it in a lot of other things. You look, for example, on my YouTube site, you look at the ratio of males to females that are watching my videos. And it's the same thing. It's about 70-30. 70% of the people looking at my videos are male. I have no control over who comes on YouTube and looks at my videos. But it just shows that's the level of interest. Now, if you go to a church, 60 or more % of people in the church are female. So it's kind of the reverse. And we see this. Like in height, we saw the bell curves in height. We've seen it in all the other characteristics. We can also see it in religiosity. And we see that women tend to be more religious than men, and men less religious. But there is an overlap here. Otherwise, there would be no men in church, or there would be no women outside of in this one. There's some overlap. Thank goodness. I'm glad to have women in our
Well,
group.
this is where the sex comes in. You know, you can go to church or you don't get it. So.
Yeah, you know, there's more. Did you read our study? Because that's exactly what we found. Go to church and don't get anything. And again, I just put a couple bell curves up here. They're not specifically from the data, but I'm just reflecting the research that's been done on this. And there's hundreds of studies now that we can point to. So women are more religious than men are. Where is that coming from? Part of it's probably coming from genetics. Part of it's probably coming from the non-shared environment as well. So, so now let's talk about the sexuality, genetics, and religious part of it. You all familiar with Kinsey?
Yep.
All right. Well, he had the 1 to 7 scale, and in terms of homosexual, bisexual, or heterosexual, and it was a pretty good idea. I think it was worth what he put into it, and I think it's been a valuable way to look at sexuality. And we're all probably a little bit of both. Some people are more extreme, but you could just take that 1 to 7 scale and you can make a bell curve out of it. We're all, maybe some people are hyper heterosexual and some people are hyper homosexual, and some people are in the middle, probably more bisexual. Whether you act on it or not is another question. I'm not saying because you score there you're acting on it, but that doesn't mean you aren't, or you wouldn't respond to it if given the opportunity or the stimulus. In 1991, Lars Pensky from the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, came up with a very simple instrument that I'm going to pass around here so you can kind of look at it. you can just take a glance at it. I'm going to put it back here. It's a simple, he started off with 7 questions. He later expanded it to 9 questions. Just take a glance at it and pass it on. And I have the scoring guide here. Although you can download it, it's on available online. 9 simple questions. He came up and he called it the Sociosexual Orientation Index. This is an interesting index because he showed with these 7 or 9, in this case 9 questions, that you could discriminate between different sexual orientations. Now, by sexual orientation, I don't mean bisexual. I don't mean heterosexual, homosexual. I mean, what is your orientation towards sex, period? So you could score anywhere on here and be a homosexual, a bisexual, or heterosexual. Anywhere on this. So it's kind of a different dimension. It's not like the Kinsey dimension between homo and hetero. It's a different dimension of what's your attitude towards sex. And what he found is there's basically 2 on our bell curve, 2 ends. The ones that are more restrictive are people who score most restrictive on this 9 questions. They're more love-oriented. They're more. They tend to have sex later. They wait to have sex, maybe even until they get married. They have fewer partners, fewer sexual partners throughout their lifetime, and they're less likely to divorce. Those who score on the less restrictive side are less love-oriented. They have sex earlier, sometimes very early, 14, 15 years old. They have more partners, and they tend to divorce more often.
Could you define less love-oriented, please?
Yeah, less love. Sex and love are not necessarily linked. They can have sex without having a lot of emotional involvement. Now, he found these, since 1991, this research has been replicated in 40-some different countries, 20-some different languages, and we get the same results. No matter where you do it, almost the same results. Now, there are some differences by gender, but what he's largely found was men don't vary much, depending upon culture. Men don't move back and forth much. Women move back and forth a lot, depending on culture. I'll come back and talk about that a little bit more. He did, and other researchers, he just originator of this research. He did a lot of research, but he's also had many other people use his survey to look at other things. And there was an enormous twin study that took place about 10 years ago. It was in Australia. Thousands of twins, and identical twins in this case. And they found identical twins here and fraternal twins there. What he found was, if I know your SSO score, I can predict your twin score 49%. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. We're seeing the same phenomena, isn't it? Whether it's extroversion or introversion, now we're seeing sexual orientation. If I know if you're highly restricted, I can predict 49% your twin is going to be highly restricted. It's very unlikely that your twin is going to be unrestricted. Very unlikely. The farther you get away from that genetic predisposition, the less likely it's going to happen. He found that if you were non-identical twins, fraternal twins, you could only predict 20%. Well, you got to remember that even fraternal twins still have genes in common because they came from the same parents. So there's going to be genetics, but it's not nearly as powerful genetics as you're going to get in identical twins. So again, we see here real quickly that the orientation towards sexuality is at least half determined by genetics. And this is really interesting because the religious right thinks we have a choice, right? And most religions try to cram down a one-size-fits-all sexuality onto us. What he also found was, is this any surprise? Women are more sexually restricted than men are. Across cultures, men's bell curve stays about the same, no matter what culture you test in. But the beautiful, interesting thing about some of his work, research shows that women, in cultures where women have more rights and more liberties, are more liberated, women's sexuality moves over towards the male sexuality. So think about Iran. The women's bell curve is probably going to be way over here in Iran. Whereas in Sweden, Denmark, or Estonia, it's going to be way over here. Now, female sexual orientation never completely overlaps men. It's never identical. But it moves significantly towards men. Men don't move at all. Men are just, you know, they're not very flexible in their sexuality.
That's better,
Information on the light bulb.
Yeah, that's probably what it is. That part of the Y's, it should have been an X, and we lost a lot of information there. So what we see is that females, and there's much more evidence on this, not just in this study. I don't really go into some of this research in my book, but there's a great book that came out last year called Sex at Dawn. Has anybody read Sex at Dawn? Okay, awesome book. It's the second best book written on sex. I'll let you guess the first one. No, it's really a very good book, and Christopher Ryan's the author of it, and he's one of the people that endorsed this book, Sex at Dawn. I would really recommend it if you were interested in sexuality. It's state-of-the-art kind of stuff. But what we found is that female sexuality is much more flexible, and there's probably a number of reasons for that. But we also know male sexuality is very inflexible. It doesn't move around very much. Women are more responsive to the culture they're in. Men are not as responsive to the culture they're in. Now this may or may not surprise you, but this kind of research really helps us understand why different cultures have an impact, especially on women, and how women respond to those women's whether it be a Swedish culture where women are just as liberated as men, or almost, or Iranian culture where the women have their head chopped off. They look cross-eyed in the wrong way or something. So there are some practical considerations in this, and they relate directly to religion. First of all, if a kid was born extroverted, do you think we could beat him into being introverted?
No, but you could try.
You could try. Yeah, I don't think I want to have him as a father. Anthony,
But they try all the time.
Yeah, they do. You're right. Parents are all the time trying to force their kids into being something the kid's not going to be. Well, it's ludicrous for us to sit here and think, well, we could beat a kid into being an extrovert. It's just almost impossible. So people who are more sexually restricted are probably born that way. And there's nothing right or wrong about it. It's being born, scoring. If you took this 9-item test, and your test said that you were on the restricted side, you're gonna have fewer sex partners. You're gonna be more focused on love, and you're gonna have sex later. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you score on the high side, it's going to be the opposite. Well, now, what if you've got very restricted parents, and they want you to behave like they? Well, we didn't get to have sex until we got married. Of course, they're probably lying, but you know, they're going to say we didn't, and we expect you to. Well, what if the kid was born with a highly unrestricted sexuality? Are you going to be able to beat it out of them? I don't think so. And actually, the more you try to force them into your mold, the more they're probably going to go away from it. Because you're not respecting who this kid is. If you got an extroverted kid, you know darn good and well they're going to come home from school and want to talk your leg off. You know, and so what are you going to do? Put tape over their mouth? That won't work. That won't shut them up. It'll just make them want to talk more. Or do, you know, you're not going to stop it. So we need to think of that in terms of sexuality as well. Now let's think about religion. Religion comes along and says, we got a one-size-fits-all plan for you. If you're a Catholic, here's our plan. If you're Mormon, here's our plan. The plans are slightly different. Baptists have a slightly different plan than Catholics do and Mormons. But they're all a plan. And all those plans If you scored the Catholic plan on the SSO, where would it fall? Way on the restricted side. You name every major religion on the planet, and every one of them says you should be sexually restricted. Now, what if those religions came out and said, every person, we don't allow any introverts into our church. Everybody has to be an introvert. And if you come into our church and you're an extrovert, we're going to force you into being the opposite. We're going to make you. It's a sin to be extroverted in our church. What do you think? Start a church
leader.
Huh?
Leader.
Self leader. You're right. It's just that stupid to think that you can take people and force them into one mold. I'm not going to be able to just say only introverts are allowed into our church, and if you're an extrovert, you're a sinner. Well, that's what people are saying. If you're a highly unrestricted, if you have an attitude, a direct orientation of highly unrestricted, you are not welcome in any of the major churches. But that's your orientation. And you're going to have a hard time resisting that inclination in your system. Just like that kid comes home from school, can't keep their mouth shut. And that kid who's highly athletic is going to find a place to play baseball, whether you want him to or not. So, religion comes along, and it actually distorts sexuality. Here's the way it works. I went out to my back, I got a little forest next to my house, and there's sugar. Look at that tree. See how crooked it is? That tree had another tree fall on it when it was pretty young, several years ago, and I pulled it off. But it was already, it had been down, and of course, then it grew up towards the sun. But it's distorted. This tree will not be able to hold near as much weight as this tree here could. A tree that's straight's going to be able to hold a whole hell of a lot of weight and a big foliage at the top, whereas this one's probably going to fall over, get damaged, a windstorm, ice storm, something's going to hurt it. And the same thing for this kind of tree. Not nearly as much ability to hold itself up. Well, religion does the same thing. I'm sorry, religions do the same thing in this way. What if a religion comes along and says, you have to be this way, you have to be sexually restricted? Imagine us taking and tying a tree down to the ground. And as the tree grows, we keep tightening the rope. So the tree's going to grow up like this, and then it's going to start going up. And you pull it back down, it's going to start going up. We're distorting the growth of that tree. You're doing the same thing to a kid. When you tell a kid, masturbation is wrong, if you masturbate, you're going to go to hell, making them feel really guilty about it, making them pray, making them go to confession, whatever your particular religion does. And masturbation is usually the first place it starts, because that's the first sexual activity almost any human has. But we know that every primate on the planet masturbates. Everyone does. So to tell a human they can't masturbate is just ridiculous. It's going to distort. And you pull and you pull and you distort and you distort. Is it any wonder that somebody grows up with sexual problems as a result of the distortion that's done to them? Now, what if you're a child that's already restricted? What if you don't, you're not a high adventure kind of person, you're not out looking for sex partners or stuff. Well, if you're a straight-laced kind of guy, and it's okay. You're going to live just fine in that religion. Baptism, you go be a Baptist and you'll do really well. Catholics, become a Catholic priest. That's the place you ought to go. Because you don't.
Less career problems later.
So you can see that a person's
I don't think there's that many restricted priests.
I wouldn't know. I haven't tested many, but you may be right there. I think it's funny that religious leaders are just like the rest of us. If we gave them this test, we would find some religious leaders are very restrictive, some are very unrestricted. What do you think Joseph Smith and Brigham Young were? Very unrestricted. Right. 38 wives for Joseph Smith and 40-some for Brigham Young, plus or minus a few. We really can't get an accurate count. Or Solomon or David. I mean, they had hundreds of wives, hundreds of concubines. So, yeah, I'd say they're pretty unrestricted. But, we've seen all these, Muhammad, he had 9 wives. I think his youngest wife was 8 or 9 years old when they're married. So he's a pedophile on top of that. Jim Jones, he pretty much had access to all the women in his commune, and you had to ask permission if you wanted to have sex with your married partner. David Koresh was the same way. It's amazing how these leaders, isn't that interesting? What we know is highly adventurous, highly energetic people often score on the very unrestricted side of this whole scale. So that means that person up there preaching oftentimes is sexually unrestricted. But yet he's telling you to be restricted.
Ted Haggard didn't have any rules.
Ted Haggard. That's a great example, see? So these poor leaders, and in some ways you got to feel sorry for them. They're up there, they have gotten this position because of this high energy, this ability to take risks, the ability to do all these things that a leader has to do, and they want lots of sex, and they want lots of different kinds of creative sex. That's what unrestricted people tend to like. So it's tearing them up inside as they're standing up there preaching from the pulpit. They're trying to fight their own demons, and so it's no wonder that every now and then you'll find one, doing things that he shouldn't be doing.
Like having a wide stance.
Yeah.
So,
I want to read something to you out of that. I forgot to pull my own book out here. I love this from Christopher Hitchens. He has a great quote that I stole from here. Oh crap, what did I do? Hitchens says this: I always take it for granted that sexual moralizing in public by a public figure is a sign of hypocrisy or worse, and most usually a desire to perform the very act that's most being condemned. This is why, whenever I hear some big mouth in Washington or in the Christian heartland banging on about the evils of sodomy or whatever, I mentally enter his name into my notebook and contentedly set my watch. Sooner rather than later, he will be discovered down on his knees in some dreary motel or latrine with an expired Visa card, having tried to pay well over the odds to be peed on by an Apache transvestite. Only Hitchens can write like that.
Oh, yeah.
So we can see that the contrast here in the personality variable, in this case, sociosexual orientation, the leader, the very characteristics that made him a great leader also make him, or her, because they're going to be females too, wanting high degrees of interesting and different kinds of sexual expression. And they're in the same person, and they don't know how to parse this out. So you're going to get a lot of sexual dysfunction. Have any of you heard Living After Faith, the podcast? Living After Faith. Oh, you got to listen. It's the official podcast for recovering from religion, and it's by Rick and Deanna Joy Lyons out of Seattle. Rick was a Pentecostal minister for over 20 years. And when he became an atheist while he was still a minister, and when he told his family, he lost everything. Everything. His wife left him, his kids won't talk to him, he lost his home, everything. So he's got quite a story to tell, but if you get on Living After Faith podcast, go back, I think it's like podcast number 4, one of the early ones. You got to listen to this. It's his story. And the title of it is Too Fucked Up to Fuck. That's the title of it. But it shows, he said, I had sex with my wife 12 times in 20 years. Yeah, I mean...
I don't know who I feel more sorry for.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I've heard that story way too many times. The most religious people don't know how to deal with sex, even inside a marriage. Well, Rick is pretty unrestricted, but he says in his podcast he never strayed at all. Well, his wife left him and all. He's now married to Deanna Joy, and she's exactly what you think, the most wonderful, cool lady. Well, okay, let's look. Kind of got a digression here, but do listen to Living After Faith, and Rick, the Too Fucked Up to Fuck. Okay, think about sex and as a rubber band against what your religious training and your genetics are. Here's your genetic. Let's say that your religion is Catholic or Baptist or Mormon, and it's over here on the restricted side of the graph. And you're born with a genetic predisposition that's down here pretty close to what the religion already asks you to do. If there's a rubber band between these two, you see there's no stretch. It's not hard for you to walk the straight and narrow. It's not hard to do what Jesus told you to do or to follow Paul's example. But what if your genetic predisposition is more towards the normal? I mean, look at that. That's pretty much in the middle, where the normal would be. Well, the rubber band's getting a little bit stretched. If you're just a normal human being, you're going to have trouble dealing with the sexual restrictions of almost any religion on the planet. Which means you're going to fall into sin. And what happens when you fall into sin? You look at a man or a woman and lust after them. Then you got to go to confession. Or you got to read the Bible. Or you got to pray. How many of you read the God Virus? Oh, good. A lot of you read that. Remember in the God Virus I talk about the guilt cycle. Well, you know, if you're over here, you're going to sin, and the only way you can get rid of that sin is to go back and get forgiveness at the place you learned it. The religion gave you the disease, and now it's going to give you the cure for the disease, and that's a guilt cycle. That's why you never hear of a Catholic going to confession in the Baptist church. And you never heard of Baptists confessing to Muslim imams. The only place you can get rid of your guilt is the place you learned it. What if you're born way over here, and you're very unrestricted, genetically? This is interesting, because in my own family, I can see it. My daughter's very restricted. She's been like that since birth. My son's very unrestricted. He has a new girlfriend every 6 months, whether he needs one or not. I mean, I'm serious. He's my hero.
What happened to the last one? I liked her.
Yeah, there's been several I liked. No, I mean, he just gets tired. He wants to move on. Or they get tired of him. I think that's as much the case as the other way around. But that's just him. And I can't condemn him. He's a great auto mechanic. He works on motorcycles. He can fix anything. I can't fix anything. I'm a total klutz. So the genes that he got weren't through me. They came from his grandfather. My grandfather was an auto repair mechanic. He was a great great mechanic. But I didn't get any of those genes. My other 3 brothers did, and my son got them. So I can't condemn him for being an auto mechanic, and I really can't condemn him for being sexually unrestricted. That's the way he was born. And no religion is going to be able to get my son to change. And the same thing with my daughter. She's unrestricted. I mean, she's very restricted, and that's the way she sees her world, and it's probably not going to change for her lifetime. It's just normal. I can't condemn somebody. She's here, and he's over here. Now, how do they look at each other? My daughter can't understand my son at all, and my son can't understand my daughter at all. It's just like they're from different planets. And, you know, I've got reasonable assurance they are my kids. I'm just kidding. I know they are. So, religion, so you can see how this rubber band thing really explains a lot of why some people struggle so much and others don't struggle at all. And religion's so happy to get these restricted people and try to force everybody else to be restricted. I think a lot of ministers are pretty restricted, and a lot of priests are probably restricted. Because it's natural, it flows, it's easy to go that direction. But the really great leaders, they're probably unrestricted. It's those little churches and the mid-sized churches that have all the restricted preachers, because they don't have that risk-taking behavior that's going to help them get to be the megachurch ministry. Yeah.
What happens, and the research might not be here for this, but if you're unrestricted, but you don't have a concept of what unrestricted is, and what I have in mind is more like the shut-in communities, like the Amish or something like that, where they don't have the option to sin in most cases, or they're going to be pretty slim. So what are the dynamics you think in cultures like that, where there's very little outside influences, or even basis for comparison?
Well, I would just point to Romeo and Juliet. If you think about that story, you've read the play or seen the movie or something, they were in a very, very restricted culture at that time. It's not unlike what Iran has right now. I mean, think of where young kids, teenage people are in Iran. And yet, you read still about girls or boys eloping together, knowing you can get your head chopped off. So, very restricted. So, all I'm saying is, biology happens. Genetics are going to take over, and even in the most restricted culture, some people are going to be driven to go their own direction. Now, obviously, the threat of death will keep a lot of people under control, but it won't keep everybody under control. Well, like you see girls running away with guys, or writing love letters, or that father that murdered his daughter because she wrote a love letter to her boyfriend, and he's Muslim, and she wasn't supposed to do that, so he murdered her. And those things are happening all the time in Pakistan, even in India. I mean, it happens in all the major patriarchal cultures to some degree. Is that answering your question?
Close on? I was just asking for your opinion, so.
Yeah. Well, I think we got evidence for it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that, would you think that there is any prostitution in Saudi Arabia?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Isn't that what Bahrain exists for? I thought that was its whole purpose.
Where is the number
Prostitutes and
one?
liquor.
Google supports this. Where is the number one search for bestiality videos?
Pakistan.
Pakistan, yeah.
Well, and what we know, in my other talk, some of you saw about where the highest porn use in the United States is. Utah.
Yeah,
Utah. And number 2 is Mississippi. So
But it's also, I've heard Utah's the highest rate of like Prozac prescriptions. I mean, when he
Yeah.
asked that question, I was just thinking, it's gonna just be depression. I mean, if you can't act out on your biological,
right.
proclivities,
Yeah.
and you don't even understand why,
Yeah.
what they are, you're just gonna be unhappy and unfulfilled.
Yeah. And you'll be torn up inside. You won't understand what the conflict, why you feel that conflict. Yeah.
But I think a lot of societies over the millennia have found ways to cope with it. The Amish, and my information is decades old from when I was in college and took a little sociology, but one of the phenomena of the Amish is what they call bundling.
Well, and
there's a certain-
Rumspringa and bundling, yeah.
Yeah, and there's just a period of time when before you get married, when a boy and a girl are allowed to do whatever they want to do as long as they're discreet. If if a baby comes, then well, you just know who you married. But there is that period where there's a certain amount of freedom, and I think a lot of societies try to set up periods like that to allow for a certain amount of getting that out.
Yes, there are some that are smart enough to do that, and the Amish have found 2 ways to do that, the bundling and the Rumspringa. Rumspringa is the practice of letting, at about 16 or 17, 18, the kids can just leave.
There's a documentary about it called
Yeah.
The Devil's Playground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
The interesting thing is they don't have the skills, so they're going to go out there.
Well, they don't have they don't believe in education
Yeah.
beyond 8th grade,
Yeah.
so the people they go and just do drugs and have sex and party until they're tired of it, then go back
Yeah.
to the Amish.
Yeah, they're just not prepared for the real world out there. Well, okay, religion and the shoulds. This is kind of the psychological aspect of everything we've been talking about. All religions like to put shoulds on you. I mean, think of what you were taught when you were a kid. You should do this, you shouldn't do that. Well, all religions are naturally sexually restricted. There are very few religions. You might think New Age, you might think pagan or Wicca. Those might be more sex positive, but even those, from our own research, they're not completely sex positive. There's still some sex negativity even within those. But all these religions condemn unrestricted sexual behavior. And religions are so the naturally conservative person is going to do just fine within a religion, but a person who's not naturally restricted or conservative is going to have a hard time dealing with it. Now, if I said, if you can't do accounting for your own taxes, you're obviously a stupid person. How many of you are stupid by my definition in here? Okay, well, I am too, by the way. That's ludicrous. If I'm an accountant, then I obviously have some abilities in those areas that most of the humans on the face of the planet don't have. But so for me to say you're stupid because you can't do accounting as good as I can, it's ludicrous. Well, it's the same thing religions try to tell you. You're stupid because you can't control your sexual behavior. You're stupid because you like to masturbate. You're stupid because you like to use pornography. You're stupid because you want more than one sex partner. I mean, all those things is what religion tells us. And those people who are highly restricted believe it. And the reason they believe it is because the church has told them. All they did was drink the Kool-Aid, and it already tasted good. The Kool-Aid tastes really bad to the people on the unrestricted side, tastes just fine to the restricted people. It's no big deal. And they don't understand it. It's like my son, my daughter does not understand my son. Restricted religious people don't understand those who are not restricted. So we can say the same thing about religiosity. I'm a really dedicated, devout, religious person. I pray 3 times a day. I read my Bible. I go to Mass. Why can't you? What's your problem? You're obviously not as close to God as I am. And that's the kind of thing you hear from people. So we see the restrictedness coming out in all these ways through religiosity. And the religious people, it just feels natural with them. You know, I had an aunt she was like a saint. Everybody loved her. And she was like a saint, unfortunately, in many other ways, too. Wonderful woman, but very restricted. Not really judgmental, thank goodness, but you knew when you passed over her limits. And it was too bad, because if she'd just gotten rid of that, she'd have been a much enriched person, I think, a much better person in many ways. So religion comes along and says, you should do this and you shouldn't do that. Now let's look at marriage combinations. This is kind of interesting. What happens if a restricted person marries a restricted person?
It's all good.
Huh?
It's all good.
It's all good in the neighborhood. Yes, we are going to have wild and crazy sex once a month in missionary position. And that's all we need. And we're going to be happy with that. Restricted people don't need a lot of sex. They don't need a lot of adventure. They don't need a lot of variety. One sex partner for life may be fine with them. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't want anybody to walk out here and say there's a right, wrong, good, bad, or anything. That's just the way they are.
The less contentious paradigm.
It's yeah, because they both have a similar worldview. Unrestricted marries an unrestricted. What's going to happen there?
Party time.
Party time.
Party time. You might find them in the swingers club. They might be polyamorous. I mean, there's a lot of things that could happen there, and they could stay just as happily married as this couple does. I mean, my girlfriend Julie had an aunt who died, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, before I knew Julie, and she had gone down to visit somewhere in Arizona or New Mexico, I can't remember. And at the funeral of her uncle who had died, and this aunt and her had been close for years, I guess. I guess the aunt pulled her aside and told her we had a really happy marriage. And I attribute that to the fact that we both had a girlfriend and a boyfriend on the side. All the time.
Sometimes that's how it works.
And they were like married for 55 or 60 years. They died in their 80s. Most of them did. So it was kind of an interesting revelation to her. She never quite figured out why she chose Julie to tell, but I don't know, maybe she sensed that Julie is unrestricted. And Julie is unrestricted, I know. She and I have both taken this test. We know what we are. So what happens if a restricted marries an unrestricted? Yeah, this could be a problem. Maybe we ought to start testing everybody before they get married. I don't know. It just means it's going to be hard to communicate. These two are going to have to really understand. The restricted person is not going to... The restricted person is going to say, well, sex once a month is fine with me. I don't see why you need more. I mean, that's literally what you will hear. When I was doing clinical psychology, people come into my office as a couple for marriage counseling, and he'd say, I'm happy with sex once a month. She says, I want it once a day. And I mean, how do you resolve that? That's a huge... Huh? Bill, I will. If I can find a book, I'll send it your way.
Quick question, I'm kind of speaking from ignorance because I don't have children, but it seems to me a common complaint that one or the other, usually the female is the argument, is unrestricted, and then kids or something else comes along, and then they become essentially restricted, and the guy's still unrestricted, and then that causes a lot of tension.
You know, there's something to that, and actually I have a whole chapter I write about that in the book. It's more than that, because it plays into the guilt cycle. Usually people, when they're first dating, even really religious people, I don't know if you ever noticed, but, well, I noticed it. Some of you might have noticed it, Catholic girls really are.
Oh, yeah.
They're fun. And they're guilty as hell. I had a Catholic girlfriend for we only dated for about 6 months. 3 weeks out of the month, we would be wild and crazy sex. And then she'd get the guilties. And it would be nothing. It was just like, instant, stop. Wait, what happened here? Did I do something wrong? No, I just can't do this. I can't do this anymore. I went to Mass and it made me feel guilty. Well, you know, weeks later, she'd start getting horny and we'd be back into it again. It's kind of a funny thing because I went to, this is back before cell phones. This is kind of dating me. I showed up at her apartment kind of unannounced, and we usually were at my house and not at her apartment. I showed up at her apartment unannounced one night, one afternoon, and you know, she invited me in, and I look around and I see stuff that wasn't there the last time I was there. Crucifixes and Bibles. I say,
Laying it on thick.
what's all this? She says, well, I always take them down if I know you're coming over. Why? She says, because I just can't come with Jesus watching. I'm serious. So anyway, it was not a very long relationship, but fun while it lasted in many ways. So the answer to your question, I have found, I write extensively about it in the book, that biology overwhelms the guilt cycle. So while you're dating, while you're having a good time, even the most guilty, male or female, can overcome their guilt. Sooner or later, they hit the wall and they get the guilties again. And I actually talk about 3 different guilty stages that you're going to go through. You're going to have great sex for about 2 or 3 weeks. Then he or she's going to say, I got to stop. I can't do this anymore. Jesus says you shouldn't have sex before you're married. But, you know, if you convert to my religion, if you become a Catholic or you become a Baptist, I'll renege. So you start going to church, you become a Catholic or whatever, and sex starts again. It's not quite as good as it was before, but it's still pretty good. After another few months, just wait, stop. No, I can't do this anymore. I'm getting too guilty. Jesus said you have to be married before you have sex. No more sex until you're married. So, okay, you get married. So it goes back to having good sex again until the kids come. In fact, it probably stops before then. But when the kids come, kids bring the guilt cycle back with a vengeance. And that's why you have to, if you're a free thinker, you've got to be really careful about marrying a restricted or a religious, I'm not restricted, a religious person, because they're going to feel guilty about not bringing, about the sex that you were having. And in the book I talk about what do all these fundamentalists out there who got pregnant before they got married, what do they tell their kids? Or even if they didn't, they still had sex before they got married. What do they tell their kids? Most of them flat lie to their kids. They say, oh, your father and I did not have sex before we got married. And they lie about it. Or they say, they just don't say anything. I've interviewed many religious people, and they say, well, I can't tell my son or my daughter that we had sex before marriage, so I'm not going to talk to them at all. So as a result, the kids get no sex education from their parents, because their parents are guilty as hell about it. So that's a partial answer to what you're asking. What's going on? It's the kids that bring the guilt cycle back into the relationship. And you won't know it until you have a kid. Then you'll see that one or the other parent gets feeling really guilty about the sex. You know, I can't have loud sex anymore because the kids are in the house. Or, you know, we can't have sex every day because kids might figure it out or something. There's all sorts of stuff that they'll come up with. And what happens is slowly but surely sex tapers off in the marriage. Now, there's more than that reason, but the guilt cycle slowly but surely kills the sex drive in marriage. Well, okay, I've got off track, but that was a good question. A whole chapter I'm not dealing with here today. Okay, religious restricted marries unrestricted. What's that gonna look like?
It's ugly, believe me.
It's like, yeah, the voice of experience over here. I'm gonna take over the lecture here now, Mike. So yeah, this, let's say the person's naturally restricted, and then you add the religion to it. They've got all these shoulds they were taught, and they're gonna should all over this person too. That's literally.
They're gonna shit all over them.
Yeah. Now, what happens when a religious unrestricted marries a religious restricted? Religious restricted marries unrestricted, and religious unrestricted marries religious restricted. What's going to happen there?
We'll pray it about.
He's going, the religious unrestricted is going to tell, Jesus said to do it now. Like, go back. Jesus said to do it now. Okay?
Well, this is an interesting conundrum here, because the person who's most unrestricted is also the most religious in the relationship. So this person is going to be constantly conflicted and having difficulty. And what you oftentimes see here is they begin behavior that the religious people like to label sex addiction. And I do not believe that I really think there's very little evidence for the concept of sexual addiction. But religions love the idea. Because if you're having too much sex, if you're masturbating too much, if you're looking at porn, that's proof that you're a sexual addict and you need to get right with Jesus. Because that's really what they're after, get you back into church. It's the guilt cycle. This person has a hard time controlling themselves. These are the Ted Haggards of the world, if you will. This is the, what's the other guy that got caught, Senator Vittner, religious senator that had several prostitutes. Larry Craig, yeah, he was the one tapping in the bathroom. Yeah, there'll be yeah, there's a new one every week.
All those blue dog Democrats that found out the cleaning ladies or whatever that usually cross other ethnic profiles as well.
Anthony Weiner.
Oh yeah, right, yeah, right, yeah. Oh yeah, and Jesse Holmes, who had a child by a black woman, and nobody knew it till after he was dead, but he supported her his whole life. So these people are really, really torn up inside. Whether they're just the average Joe Blow religious person or Jane Doe or a religious leader. And we see it coming out all the time, so that conflict. Well, here's what St. Paul said, and one of the few things I actually agree with St. Paul in. For the good that I would do not, for the good I would, I do not, but the evil which I would not, that I do. It's very convoluted thinking. But, what is he saying there? I can't help myself. Biology happens. Now, Paul said that he had a thorn in his side. I think he had a mistress on the side himself. Or he was gay. There was something going on there. Or he masturbated too much. I have no idea. Or at least in his mind he did. I don't know. Yeah. So here's the way it works in the brain. This is fairly recent research with MRI stuff. We can start looking at what's going on in the brain at different places. And I will defer to Hinton for the real graphics and all the technical terms. But here's basically what's going on. You learn religious ideas, and they occur somewhere in this part of your brain. You experience the feelings of guilt in conflict with the sexual tendencies that you're genetically programmed to do. So here you've got sexual tendencies. You want to have sex. You want to express yourself sexually. That's going to happen here. But your religious ideas say, no, you can't do that till you're married. Or it's going to send you to hell if you do this. Well, the conflict between these two pieces here results in feelings of guilt, cognitive dissonance between your biological self and your cultural self, what you've learned from your religious culture, and it comes out as guilt. Then those feelings of guilt are not going to be able to be controlled unless these two start talking to each other. And therein is the problem. Why did I? The basic story was this, that a boy and a girl in Bible college, and this is what they wrote to me, or she wrote to me. They were in Bible college, they met, they did everything except have sex, knowing they would be kicked out if they did have sex. It was, it was a very conservative Bible college. One night, evidently he got way too horny or something. He says, let's just pray right now and have God have us get married inside of God. So they kneeled down, they prayed to get married inside of God, and then they fucked like bunny rabbits. Well, the next day he didn't show up. He didn't respond to her. This went on for several days. They finally met somewhere and he said, "You want to talk?" This went on for a couple of weeks, driving her nuts. She said in her email to me that this was the most loving thing she'd ever experienced, the most pleasurable thing. She felt safer, she felt more loved by him than she'd ever experienced in her life. She says, this was the most God-given thing I'd ever experienced in my life. I couldn't believe it was not, a spiritual experience. But he wouldn't talk to her. This went on for several weeks. And finally he says, I need to talk to you. And they meet in the library in a quiet place. And he says, we have to go confess to the dean that we did this and we can't do it again. She says, yeah. He said, no, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. There's nothing wrong with what we did. It was too beautiful. It had to be ordained by God. And she's still religious at that time. She said, the semester was almost over, so just don't go to the dean yet. You can go whenever you want, but not till I'm finished. She finished the semester and she left that school. Got her credit and got out. She never saw him again. Now, this poor guy is conflicted about the religion. If you look at this brain, this guy's sex drive is pushing it. Biology is happening. And his religious ideas are saying, you're going to hell for it, and here's the guilt coming out. This part is not talking to this part. Literally, these two parts of the brain are not communicating. He is not integrating his personality. She was integrating hers. She said at the end of her email, after several lovers, after that I had several lovers later, I finally found a great lover. He's a little bit religious, but it doesn't bother me too much, and we have great sex. So she's integrated these two, and probably gotten rid of the whole religious idea thing, because she's an atheist now, so I'm pretty sure she's gotten rid of it. But even atheists can still have some guilt feelings. So we need to integrate the brain, and that's what's really going on. Get these two parts to talking to each other. And that kid that she was with, her boyfriend, he hadn't integrated these parts. They weren't talking to each other. And as long as he stays religious, they're probably never going to talk to each other. I'm going to guarantee that kid, that boy, went on to do other things that surprised the hell out of him. How many of you have ever engaged in a behavior afterwards you thought, dang, you found it? Well, it's too late. I've already told you this. Thank you for finding it. How many of you have had, it could have been yesterday or 10 years ago, you've engaged in some kind of behavior and you look back and say, wow, I couldn't have done that, right? That's not characteristic of me. Yeah, we've all done it. Well, that's because we're not integrated. There's pieces of our brain that aren't talking to other pieces of our brain. And I wasn't even drinking, or I wasn't even under influence of anything, but I did something really stupid or something that was totally out of character for me. Well, that's what this kid's going to do. He's going to go out and do it again. And he won't understand. And he's going to pray and pray and pray and feel guilty, guilty, guilty. Read his Bible and tell other people not to do it, but then he's going to go do it again. That's what religion does to you. It distorts your sexuality. So, if we can get the other parts talking to each other, you can usually get rid of this inappropriate expression of sexuality. And like pedophile priests or ministers going out and playing with prostitutes, even though they say they everybody else they shouldn't or whatever. And I don't want to pick on just one. But the loss of control indicates the guilt is not being handled properly, and it's probably inappropriate guilt in the first place. So the guilt cycle and the religious unrestricted guilt cycle and the religious unrestricted. The religious unrestricted has religious ideas about sex, but their genetic predisposition goes the opposite direction. So they have guilt and they ask for forgiveness, then the tension builds, then they engage in the sexual act again, which makes them feel guilty, of course, and then they go ask for forgiveness, then the loss of control happens, and the whole cycle begins again. This is where you get what people are labeling now sexual addiction. I don't think it's sexual addiction. I think it's religious addiction. It's religion that's driving this behavior. What if you took religion out of it? Then you'd no longer feel guilty. Many times, I've noticed in my clinical career, guilt drives behavior. Think about it. What you're guilty of, you start thinking about a lot more. You know, I can't have sex with my boyfriend. I can't have sex with my girlfriend. I can't. I shouldn't. So, I think it looks like sexual addiction. I think it's really religious stuff. So, in conclusion, I think sexuality is broad and varied, and we should not allow ourselves as secularists to be boxed in to the religious definitions of what's good, bad, right, and wrong. Whether you're restricted or unrestricted, avoid judging other people for what they are. And as long as they're safe, as long as they're open and honest, that's their business, not yours. Religion tries to put us into one-size-fits-all. If you can eliminate sexual guilt, it becomes a lot easier for you to channel your sexuality in appropriate ways. Now, by appropriate, I mean ways that are safe for you and safe for your partner, and don't do emotional or physical damage to yourself or other people. That would be my broad definition of appropriate. Respect your own tendencies and channel them appropriately and safely. And teach your children sexual responsibility, not religious guilt. We've got lots of evidence that kids raised in secular homes behave in lots more rational and sexually responsible ways than kids raised in religious homes. The data has been in for 10 years. We know abstinence only doesn't work. We know religious training actually makes people behave in unsafe ways. So, being open and honest with your kids, being rational with your kids, and not giving any religious bullshit is the best way to protect your kids. If you want to protect your kids, be honest with them. And it's kind of a revolutionary idea. So, last thing is, sex is fun, so is drinking.
Amen.
So, do them responsibly. And there's no Jesus to come and forgive you if you hurt somebody. So you need to do it right the first time, so to speak. Be responsible, be aware, protect yourself, protect anybody you're involved with. And last, don't be a vector for religion or for an STI. Okay, well, that's our last little thought for the day. I love that.